Howdy folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Moondrop Chu. This is the latest single dynamic driver I am from Moondrop, the company that's brought you many very well-tuned single dynamic driver earphones, including like the $80 Moondrop Aria, there's a $200 KATO, the $800 Illumination, and then now we've got this, which is the $20 Moondrop Chu. That's right, 20 bucks. So, I mean, anytime a Moondrop IM comes out, frankly, it's been a long time since I've heard a Moondrop IM that I didn't love. So when a new one comes out, it's not really going to be much of a question about, is it good? The question is going to be, how good is it? And that's what I wanted to find out by listening to the Moondrop Chu for the past week or so and comparing it with some other IMs in this roughly $20 price range. And, well, I don't know. I think right now I can just go ahead and say you should probably buy this thing, but we'll get into the details about exactly why I think you should buy this thing. And I don't know, maybe you can make up your own mind, but I'm gonna go ahead and say right now at 20 bucks, it's gonna be hard to go wrong, but we'll go into more detail. So this review, like all my other reviews, is a live stream. If you're watching now live, how's it going? If you have questions about the Moondrop Chu or anything else that we talk about, please do leave it in the live chat. I'm gonna ignore you for a little bit, but we'll get through the review, and at the end of the review, we'll have a bit of a back and forth conversation and hopefully answer all of your burning questions. And then one last thing before we get to the review is shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending in the Moondrop Chu. They sent it in for free for review, and there's a link to them in the description down below if you want to check it out. But otherwise, let's jump to the table, start talking about the physical aspects of the Chu, which frankly is where they're probably the most trade-offs when we're talking about this $20 price range. Although honestly, the build and stuff in here is not too bad. Quickly, a tour of the box and the packaging. Here's the box. Here's the art. Actually, this is one of my favorite looking Moondrop packagings. Good job there on that. And then what you get inside is fairly modest, but again, for 20 bucks, honestly not bad. You get this little carry pouch, which, you know, you can see how thin this is. It's sort of like a felt. It's got a snap on it. It's not gonna be super protective, but it's better than just throwing the IMs loose in your bag or something like that. The Chu does also come with these, which if you've never seen something like this before, this is basically a silicone wrap around which you can run the cable through to give you preformed ear hooks because, well, as we'll find out later with the Chu, it doesn't have built-in preformed ear hooks like a lot of other earphones. Well, so you have this as an option, but personally not something I use. I don't really like the clunkiness of that sort of thing, but I suppose it's there in case you really need your preformed ear hooks. Okay, otherwise, what do we have here? This is frankly reason number one, and maybe the only reason, in my opinion, that you need to go ahead and just buy the Chu, is that it comes with a full set of Moondrop's new spring tips. And if you're new to this channel, maybe you've not heard me gush about these before, but these are just my favorite ear tips. I bought a bunch of these. I have them on a lot of my different IMs because I love them so much. And typically, if you want to buy these things, well, they're not that expensive. You can get like 3 different pairs for 12 bucks, I believe. So at 20 bucks, it's not exactly free. But what you can't get for 12 bucks is you can't get all 3 sizes. And that's what you get here with the Chu. Of course, you get a large, a medium, and a small size in spring tips. And if you're not totally sure which size you should get, a $20 starter pack that also includes a free IM, frankly, again, in my opinion, is reason enough to go ahead and buy the Chu for now. But okay, that's just what comes inside the box. Let's talk about the earphone itself. And we're gonna unfortunately talk about, I think, the worst part of this IM right now, which is this cable. This cable is, frankly, amongst one of the worst cables I've had on an IM. I don't wanna say it's the worst, but man, it is just about. So I've had this thing outside of a box. I've even given it the hair dryer treatment to try and straighten it out and make it just more pliable, remove some of the bends and stuff. But you can see it's still got plenty of kinks in it. And then it's maybe even worse beyond the kinks is it's got this springy character. It always wants to return to its natural original shape or whatever it came inside the box. And frankly, I'm just not a big fan of it. The other downside with this cable, actually this isn't going to be the only one, but the other one that's worth calling out is that the texture of this cable, let's punch in on this, not that you're going to see the texture, but the texture is a little bit on the grippy side, which just means that as I'm dealing with this thing, and unwinding it, it gets caught up on itself a lot. It gets tangled very, very easily. Even as I'm wrapping it here, it's just not the most pleasant cable. So there's that. They do also have, Moondrop's fairly large Y split in the center, which I'm still not a big fan of, but it doesn't ruin my favorite cable, which is the SSR cable. So not that big of a complaint, I suppose. And then the other thing that this cable really, well, we'll talk about this actually in a little bit. I will get to up here at the top where I mentioned there are no preformed ear hooks on this cable. And the other kind of trade-off here is that the cable's not removable. Most of Moondrop's IMs have removable cables. The Chu at 20 bucks, unfortunately, you don't have a removable cable. So this cable that I'm not a big fan of, you are stuck with it. The other thing that I think is worth calling out, right? We talked about this thing not having preformed ear hooks. You still do wear this over ear. It is not worn under ear, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But, well, maybe, you know what? I'll just show you that right now. So I don't mind not having the preformed ear hooks. There's some other IMs that are like that, or like a lot of the times like bullet-shaped IMs will have, they'll be able to be worn over ear or dangling down. They don't have preformed ear hooks. I'm totally used to that. I'm not going to complain about that. But I do wish that the Chu had a chin cinch, and you'll see here, well, maybe you'll see here, close in on that. I've actually installed my own chin cinch on this. This does not come with the Moondrop Chu. And I find that fairly important because when I'm wearing an earphone like this, and you've got that cable that's kind of loosely wrapped around the back of the ear, I find it important to be able to use that chin cinch to apply just enough kind of like downward pull on that ear hook to keep it snugly in place. So that's a bit of a bummer, but I guess it's going to lead us into talking about the earpieces, which are already in my ears. So I guess I'll talk about how they fit. And frankly, I actually think this is like my favorite fitting single dynamic driver earphone from Moondrop. Like, it's just, you can see how small it is. It fits in quite well. It's snug enough to fit in behind, what do we call this? Like the anti-tragus or something like that. There's, ear nerds and stuff will probably know what that is, but it's, small enough to fit in there and kind of snug in behind that, which just means that fit security on a single dynamic driver earphone usually is a bit of a sacrifice. This is actually pretty good, and especially with this chin cinch in place and these somewhat grippy cables, it actually holds its place inside my ear quite well. That's not the only thing that I think is pretty good about these earpieces. Normally I would start with this, but because I had it in my ears, I was talking about the fit. The other stuff that I think is really good about this is the aesthetics and the build on this thing. So visually, I think this is actually one of Moondrop's best looking earphones as well. Like, I think this looks cooler than something like the Moondrop KATO personally. It's got this black look with gold print. That is gold. I don't know if you can tell that totally on camera, but it's just really, really well done. It doesn't show fingerprints or anything like that. Really quite well done. And it is made out of a metal. I don't know, they call it like a zinc alloy or something like that, but it is a metal. Now, it is worth calling out that Moondrop has a bit of a reputation for not having the best quality paint on their earphones. I've personally never actually had an issue with any of mine, so I can't say from firsthand experience, but just maybe a fair warning about that. But I'll say that, again, I have no issues with the paint on this for my unit, so that's good. But yeah, otherwise, just really pretty happy with the earpieces, pretty unhappy with the cable. I feel like this is an IM that people are going to fairly reliably remove and replace the cable with their own cables. I'm honestly pretty interested in figuring out how to do that, but for the purposes of this review, not something I did, but otherwise there you go. And that's about as tidy as I can get this cable to wrap up. So I think that's going to do it for, as much as I can really say about the build here on this $20 IM. So let's talk about the sound of the Moondrop Chu. And like I typically do, we'll just start by broadly describing, let's get that so you can see those earpieces a little bit. We'll start by broadly describing the sound signature, which is actually pretty interesting here with this earphone. Like, a lot of the times in the $20 price range, right? The buyers for this are typically just looking for, they're just looking for an earphone, not super picky about it. And so a lot of manufacturers will give them V-shaped sound signatures, which are pretty fun, but not that satisfying, at least not for someone like me. And it's interesting here with the Moondrop Chu. I think Moondrops went with a really, really nice tuning on this thing that I would describe as kind of a bright neutral with a very tasteful sub-bass boost. Bright neutral, sub-bass boost, and a $20 earphone. That's pretty awesome. It is maybe a little bit lean in the mid-range. I wouldn't say overly lean, but it is a little bit lean in the mid-range and sort of in the upper bass, mid-bass region. The vocal presentation I would describe on this is generally forward, and contributing to that is a lower treble emphasis on this thing that we'll talk a little bit more about, but I think that forward vocal presentation and that little bit of bass kick in the back, honestly, just it makes it a neutral sounding earphone for sure, but it's got enough fun to it to really make it a really engaging set that I think honestly a lot of people are going to like. So if you're scared of the word neutral and it sounds boring, I don't think that's what the Chu is. But if you're looking for a big V-shaped sound signature, it's not quite that. So what are the things here that I like about the sound on the Moondrop Chu? Well, I just kind of got done gushing about that tuning. I'm a big fan of that. Bright neutral sound signature is exactly what I am all about. So pretty excited to see that here on such a budget set. I would say that tuning wise, right, like another earphone kind of in this price range that I'm also a big fan of is the Moondrop SSR. It's actually double the price of this thing. And just purely on tonality, and like when I talk about tonality, that's like, you know, how natural do things sound? Do vocals, you know, come across nasally, honky, a little bit low contrast, etc. This honestly does vocals, I think, significantly better than the Moondrop SSR, which is really interesting. The SSR being a double the price IM, and again, an IM I'm a big fan of. So just generally, the tuning here is pretty good. You do get the quality of that tuning also just like it gives you a good sense of timbre, right? It just means that instruments sound like they're supposed to. And usually where I have issues with timbre is in sort of high frequency percussion, where a lot of budget sets, and the SSR frankly is guilty of this, they just don't quite sound right. Like, so hi-hats and cymbals and stuff like that might not quite sound totally natural. Here on the Chu, they actually sound really good. Pretty into that. And then as we're going through the rest of the frequency response, I think the bass on this is actually really well tuned, especially for a budget set, but I think honestly you don't even need that, especially for a budget set. Caveat here, the bass is just about exactly what I like. Maybe I would like a little bit more in the mid-bass region, but I don't know, I'm not going to complain about where it's at right now. It is very much sub-bass focused, the emphasis that you get there. And again, like I mentioned, there's enough emphasis there to make it fun, but you never have any issues with it, you know, smearing up the mid-range or anything like that. It's not even close to intruding on the mid-range, frankly. So yeah, just generally what I like about this thing is it's a bright, lively sounding earphone. That for a neutral tune is still a lot of fun, but it's not all positives here. There are some things that bug me a little bit about the Chu. So let's talk about it. Some of the things that I don't love about it, okay? While we just talked about how this is very much surprisingly a very good frequency response, especially if you were looking at, you know, just the frequency response on a graph, which you can check out. I have linked to squig.link in the description. But in practical listening, it's not perfect, okay? Maybe you're saying, duh, it's not perfect. It's $20, but there are some things that I think are worth calling out. That lower treble emphasis that I talked about when I was talking about the general tune, I think can be a little bit aggressive, okay? And it's not so much in the fatiguing sense, although it can be a little bit distracting, I find. Really what it does is it just kind of gives a little bit of a splashy character to things like cymbals again. You know, you do get that good sense of decay on them, and they sound like they've got that sense of weight to them that a lot of sets will miss. But there is kind of an extra bit of splashiness, and it can also kind of add a little bit of a wetness sounding to vocals. That might seem like kind of a minor complaint for a $20 earphone, and I don't know, in context it really is, but I do honestly think that lower treble is enough of an irritant and sort of a distractant that kind of puts a caveat on recommendations here. So I've already told you, you should buy this thing. You should buy this thing because it sounds pretty good. It sounds very good, and it comes with Moondrop spring tips. But the reason you might want to consider not buying it is if you are particularly distracted by lower treble or something like that. So there's that. Honestly, at 20 bucks, that's really my only complaint. You know, I don't think this thing holds up to the technicalities and the control and the weight of something like a Moondrop KATO, but that's a almost $200 earphone. I don't expect that. The technical performance here is honestly not just good enough for the money. I think it's actually really good. And under 50 bucks, this thing holds its own. So those are my general thoughts here with the Moondrop Chu. But let's put it in context. Let's bring in a couple of competitors, some other IEMs around the price range, and talk about how they stack up in terms of price and features. Are pretty much all the same. Sound signature and technical performance. So let me go ahead and pull this stuff to the side and bring in our other competitors. Here we've got the Moondrop Chu, of course. Here we've got the familiar Tanchjim Tanya. And here we've got the final E500. Okay. All of these are single dynamic driver earphones. The Chu, we just got done talking about, 20 bucks. The E500, 25 bucks. And then the Tanya is, I believe, $22. Both of these come in variants with a microphone. I think you pay an extra couple dollars for a microphone. I don't believe the final E500 comes with a microphone if you want it. But yeah, that's generally the basic descriptions. In terms of sound signature, it's actually pretty interesting. You know, in this budget price range, you actually get access to a pretty diverse range of sound signatures, right? So here with the Chu, this is your bright neutral. It's got a bit of sub bass boost. So this is like natural, neutral, fun, maybe a little bit on the thin side. Go over here to the final E500. I would say this is very much also a neutral sound signature, but a very different tune on it, or very different take. This is a warm sound signature. So it's got kind of this thickness to its sound signature. It's rolled off on either end, right? The sub bass doesn't really extend as well. The treble is definitely not as aggressive as the treble here on the Chu, but you just kind of get this laid back, nice, warm, neutral sound signature, still mid-range focused. And then over here in the Tanya, this one's kind of the opposite. This is like the V-shape, although it is a little bit on the warm side. It's pretty full in the mid bass, a little bit on the thick side. But yeah, generally this is like your fun V-shaped sound signature. This is your laid back, warm, neutral sound signature. And this is your still fun, but still neutral sound signature. If I were ranking these just purely in terms of tuning, I would actually probably rank them like this, where I think the Chu has the best tuning of the bunch. The E500 is next. And then this one, just because it's the least mid-range focused, is lowest on my scale. And now in terms of technicalities, they all have some advantages. There are some reasons why you might actually prefer one over the other for each of these, which sounds like a little bit of a cop-out. But, well, let's just go through them one by one. The Moondrop Chu, right? The treble is really just kind of like the thing that is worth calling out here. It's a little bit splashy. I would say the bass on this is, of the bunch, my favorite. Again, it's not the most bass. I would say the most bass is over here on the Tanya, but the bass quality is just, in my opinion, a lot better here on the Chu. It's tighter, it's punchier. Again, it's well controlled so that it doesn't smear up the mid-range. That's the Chu. Really, where it falters is in that treble splashiness. Whereas here with the final E500, I would say this is the smoothest of the bunch. It's the easiest to listen to. The bass on the E500 is a little bit soft. It can be a little bit woolly because it does kind of bleed into the mid-bass frequencies, and the treble is actually pretty tame on this set. Surprisingly though, I find this one still fairly, I don't want to call it technical. This is that we're talking about a $25 single dynamic driver earphone, but despite the fact that it's got that warm, laid-back tune, you still get a decent sense of separation in the sound, where I think the Chu definitely exaggerates that and does that better, but you can still get that here out of the final E500. And then over here in the Tanya, honestly, in terms of that separation and that head stage, I would say this is the most impressive in that sense. It does give you that biggest sense of space. But the mid-range is, I think, the soupiest of the bunch. You get, I think, a stronger sense of micro contrast in that mid-range and vocal region over here on the final E500. On the Chu, it's a little bit more macro contrasty. Here, the mid-range is just, it's sacrificed to the altar of bass. It's not bad, but well, it's not my favorite part of this set. And then I would say the treble here on the Tanya is mostly safe. There is a little bit of upper treble emphasis. Some people are sensitive to that kind of thing. I'm not super sensitive to that. Like a wispy sound, it's there for sure, but it doesn't really bother me. But there you go. That's kind of how they compare. I mean, if I'm ranking them in terms of technicalities, honestly, this one's pretty tough. Woof. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I would personally put the Tanya last just because of that somewhat soupy mid-range. And these two, you know, this is the one that's going to sound the most obviously technical in a lot of ways, but that treble splashiness really does. It really does hold me back from wanting to listen to this thing for long periods of time. Whereas the final E500, this is a set, and this is a set, I made this comparison just over the past week. I've been listening to these things back to back. This is a set that I can just flip on, start listening to, and never get tired of it. In fact, that somewhat warm, woolly sound signature, like tonality, I actually get used to it, and it just sounds transparent and clear enough. And this one's just the easiest to listen to. So it's the least impressive, I think, in terms of technical performance and in sort of the obvious ways, but it's the one that I find is just actually the most pleasant to listen to over long listening sessions. So I think that's going to do it for my review and comparison here of the Moondrop Chu. You notice I strategically did not unwind it until the end because that cable is a mess. But yeah, if you're interested in checking this thing out, I should give it a score first. Out of 5 stars, Moondrop Chu, I'm going to go ahead and give it a very solid 4 stars out of 5. Again, I think you should probably just buy it if 20 bucks doesn't really make a big difference to you, because it sounds really good and it comes with 3 sets of Moondrop spring tips, which, again, my favorite tips. They're great on everything. But even if you don't need a pair of Moondrop spring tips, this set, yeah, it does a lot right. In terms of the tuning, I think it's the best of the bunch here on the table. Does have that one caveat with the treble that can be a little bit on the irritating side, but it's not like, you know, the irritating treble that you might get on like a KZ earphone or something like that, where it's actually piercing and I don't want to say painful, but like truly irritating. Here it's just a little bit on the distracting side. And that's why it holds it back from being, I think, a 5-star, but honestly, 4 stars out of 5. This is a really highly recommended set. And if you're interested in checking it out, I do have a link in the description down below. While you're down there, if you found this video helpful, you liked it, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and please hit that like button. It looks like this. It helps me out. And then I'll catch you on the next super review unless you're here live, in which case hang out and let's have a chat.